has all these multiple agencies doing the same thing, and we have to be able to find ways to be able to combine these. I understand that we're creating jobs per megawatt in the middle of this, but the reality of this is we've got to be able to find ways to be able to save money. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, reclaiming my time, I will point out that the underlying bill reduces CEQ to 2006 levels and caps their full-time equivalents or their employees at 2006 levels. So that means that they will have a reduction in force. They will lose 3 employees. I might also point out that when I was the general counsel for the governor in my state, I also ran the Natural Resources Sub-Cabinet. And we were actually at the state level the mirror image, or I was, of what CEQ does. We were in the position of responding to NEPA documents that were sent to us by the federal government from federal agencies, and as a state, we're attempting to coordinate our responses to NEPA documents for various state agencies, the agency that regulates water, the agency that looks after state land, the agency that does environmental quality in Wyoming, the agency that does state forests, and on and on. And so our Natural Resources Sub-Cabinet was the state equivalent and mirror image in the responding avenue to what CEQ is in Washington. Now let me give you an example of some of the things that CEQ has coordinated here in Washington and why it makes sense. We've seen in this debate earlier that fighting Asian carp is a priority for the Great Lakes region. Over the past year and a half, CEQ has brought all the federal agencies together with the Great Lakes states to combine efforts to fight this invasive species. So they've coordinated on an interagency, intergovernmental framework. And without the framework, it's hard to pull the Army Corps of Engineers, Department of the Interior, EPA, and these groups together with the states to have a shared response to a multi-state, multi-jurisdiction, multi-level of government issue like the Asian carp. That is something, I believe, that makes it appropriate for CEQ existence to continue. I understand the frustrations that some people have with it, but quite frankly, that type of coordination, I think, could, when managed properly, allow the federal government to speak with one voice where their own disparate agencies would have different mission statements. And so that type of coordination is important. Mr. Chairman, for those reasons and for the cuts that have already been undertaken in this bill, I do rise to oppose the amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. I didn't plan on speaking, but I couldn't help, after hearing the comments, and I would gladly yield 30 seconds to the gentlelady if she wants to explain further. I've never heard this used as a measurement before, as a positive measurement, that the number of jobs per megawatt for solar power. Now, I'm from Arizona. I like solar power. It's great. But since when are we using as a positive the number of jobs it takes to create a megawatt? Will it be seen as a positive in the future if it takes more jobs to create a megawatt? Is that a good thing for the economy? Is that a jobs program of some type? I mean, it baffles me sometimes at the arguments that are made as to why we should keep programs like this going and keep spending. I would be glad to yield time to the gentlelady if she wants to explain that further.
I think that the gentleman, the point is that we're creating jobs using less energy, and when we do that, we save energy. But these jobs that are being created are improving our economy, our ability to compete internationally, and it takes these jobs use less energy.
No,
so we're not investing in nuclear power plants, and we're not investing in coal burning, which leads to.
I think the gentlelady.
I kind of figured you'd want your time back.
I thank the gentlelady, but that is precisely the opposite of the number of jobs per megawatt. If nuclear creates more energy for fewer jobs and less cost, that's the direction we should go, because it's non-polluting as well. But this notion that we have to keep this going because it just creates jobs and jobs per megawatt, it just baffled me. I rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. We're borrowing 41 cents on every dollar. We ought to save money where we can. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oklahoma will be postponed. Clerk will read.
Page 98, line 17, Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board salaries and expenses, $10 million. Office of Navajo and Hopi Indian Relocation, salary and expenses, $7,530,000. Institute of American Indian and Alaska Native Culture and Arts Development, payment to the institution, $7,900,000. Smithsonian Institution, salaries and expenses, $626,971,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2013.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would revert the Smithsonian funding back to the fiscal year 2008 levels. This is simply asking the Smithsonian to tighten their belts and to pull their weight, just like other agencies and departments within the federal government are having to do. Mr. Chairman, this country is broke. We've spent all the money in our bank and then some. We have to prioritize where we can afford to spend money and where we simply cannot afford to. I believe asking the Smithsonian to simply scale back their spending to levels of 2008 is more than reasonable. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Well, I rise to claim the time in opposition to this amendment, Mr.
Gentleman is
Chairman.
recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the Smithsonian Institution is the world's leading museum complex. People from all over the world come to Washington, oftentimes with the principal intent of seeing the Smithsonian, but it is invariably part of their trip to our nation's capital. It is something that every member of the legislative branch should be very proud of. In fact, we should spend more of our time in those museums. They're extraordinary, every single one of them. They tell the story of our nation's origin. They reflect the evolution of knowledge of the things that are relevant to our very existence. And in addition to the traditional museums along our National Mall, we have the National Zoo, again, known throughout the world. But this amendment that would cut $55 million would wind up eliminating 600 positions from the Smithsonian, because 90% of the costs of museums are personnel. We're told that given the existing costs that have continued to increase over the last 4 years, not just personnel, but particularly energy costs, the costs of maintaining the world's finest museum complex, that the Smithsonian would have to close at least one, if not two, major museums, or the National Zoo. Doesn't seem to me that in order to save a relative fraction of a bill. This bill is about $27 billion in order to save, what is that, 0.5%? That we would want to close one or two of the finest museums in the world. Now, if you did abolish 600 federal positions at the Smithsonian, you would also have to pay severance costs. It'd create personnel management turmoil for years. You would be saying to the Smithsonian, which makes us proud for the quality, and really the efficiency of its operation, you would be saying, sorry, but we don't think that you should be a priority. But the reality is, if you were to ask the federal taxpayer, not just the people in this region, but all over the country, how important the Smithsonian is, seems to me they would make it a priority. One of the last things we want, it would seem, is that our visitors come from our constituencies, our congressional districts, to Washington, and then we have a sign on the front door of one of the major museums, sorry, closed due to short-term budget cuts. Now, I trust that that would not be the final reality, but if we were to pass such an amendment when we vote on this, I think it would send a signal. It's the wrong signal. Just as the uncertainty about the debt ceiling is the wrong signal to be sending the rest of the world. Gosh sakes, this is the wrong signal to be sending to the people who work so hard at the Smithsonian to make us proud. It's the wrong signal to send to our constituents. It's the wrong thing to do. It's kind of shocking that we would have such amendment, frankly. The committee has looked at every line item, has cut every place they could, with very few exceptions, and we pointed out those exceptions. But the committee, I'm sure, did not consider closing down one or two of our major museums on the National Mall in order to save a fraction of 1% of the cost of this appropriations bill. So I would very, very strongly oppose this misguided amendment, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
To follow on the remarks of my good friend from Virginia, I must say this is almost incomprehensible. You know, the Smithsonian, as a collection of museums and zoological park and so forth that my colleague talked about, is half the picture. And indeed, if any of those facilities are closed, there will be a lot of unhappy families from Georgia and Tennessee and Montana and all the 50 states. But it's a lot more than that. The Smithsonian is a collection of research centers that goes far beyond biplanes and folk art and portraits and jewelry and pandas. The Smithsonian Astronomical Observatory, one of the finest collections of research scientists in the world for understanding the workings of our universe. Barro Colorado Island in Panama, in the middle of the Panama Canal. Probably the principal research center for understanding the workings of our biological world. Oh yes, there'd be a lot of unhappy families if this amendment were to go through. But among those 600 positions that would be lost, no doubt, would be some of the finest scientists in the United States, in fact, in the world. And there would be a lot of unhappy scientists around the world who would wonder what in the world were they thinking of? What in the world were they thinking in Washington, D.C. when they cut back on these research efforts? I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Wyoming rise?
Mr. Chairman, to strike the last word.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I would like to point out that the request for this agency's appropriation under the President's budget was $110 million more than is appropriated, and that we, as a committee, did cut this current budget by $10 million already. And I'd also point out something that's more philosophically based, and that is my own personal view, and it's shared by many of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle, that we should be funding federal functions while we are here in Washington, and acknowledge that certain functions really can be handled as well or better by the states, and that the states created the federal government, not the other way around. And so we should be deferring to the states for everything that is not specified either in the Constitution or is purely a federal function. The Smithsonian Institution is a purely federal function. It is something that was given to the United States of America, that is the federal government and the people of this country through us are stewards of, and I believe it is appropriate as a purely federal function that we fund it adequately. Now, we have, as I point out, reduced its budget during these tough fiscal times, but as something that is purely federal in its approach, and the benefit to our nation and indeed to the world that is provided by this great gift that was given to the people of the United States of America centuries ago, I do rise in opposition to the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Idaho rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment. This is truly one of the less thought-out amendments, I think, that's been proposed to this bill. Smithsonian is truly a gem in this country. Ask the American people. If you look at what they are doing and the important role they play, a lot of people think that it's not important if you don't come to Washington. The Smithsonian doesn't do anything. They only operate some museums here and a few things like that. That's not the truth. The Smithsonian operates all across this country. If you look at what they're doing in digitalization of the things they have in their museum and stuff, and they're reaching out to schools and so forth, it is making an amazing difference. Go on their website and see what they're doing in terms of the applications for your iPhone and things like that are making a difference in people's lives. Plus, the research that they do on a variety of things around this country is just amazing. If the gentleman wants to reduce this by, everybody can take a $58 million hit, I guess. But this is $100 million or more already below what the President requested. Another $58 million hit on this would be a substantial hit. They also raise $158 million in private funds. That tells you that private corporations and citizens all across this country love what the Smithsonian does, and they do a fantastic job. If you want to get the public outraged, slice the Smithsonian's funding so that when someone comes here to visit Washington, maybe a trip they planned on for quite some time, and their kids want to see the #1 thing they came to see, guess what it is? Air and Space Museum and the other things that occur here. But the Smithsonian is so much more than that. Go look at what they do at the National Zoo. Go look at what they do in their collections that they have. This is an incredible organization. I'm only sorry that in this budget climate, and I appreciate the gentleman's desire to address the budget deficit that we have. Everybody wants to do that. There are some things that we should maintain. The Smithsonian is one of them. So I would hope that not only would the members of this body vote against this amendment, but they would vote, hopefully, unanimously against this and in support of the Smithsonian and the work they do for this country. And I appreciate the gentleman's time, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose the gentlewoman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman,
Strike the last word.
I am, yeah. I asked to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for
Yeah,
5
thank
minutes.
you. I just wanted to say that I am the coolest grandmother in this country as far as my grandchildren are concerned. Not because I'm a member of the House of Representatives and have been for 19 years, but because I live within walking distance of the National Zoo. They come here, they cannot get enough of the National Zoo that is sponsored by the Smithsonian. And then when they've had enough of the National Zoo and know they can come back the day after, they are on their way to the Smithsonian, and it depends on their age, and they've developed over these years from wanting the simplest entertainments at the zoo to being very curious and wanting to know more and more about it. My 7-year-old grandson that was here over the 4th of July is committed to be a scientist from what he experienced over this last week and the few times he's been here before. It's a learning experience, and if you don't have grandchildren, maybe you don't get it. You think that this isn't important to the people in this country, but there is nobody that comes into my office of any age that doesn't thank me for the experience they've had at the Smithsonian. I remind them that that is their entity. It isn't ours. They pay for it through their taxes, and they are proud to do that. I stand here against that amendment and in support of the Smithsonian Institute. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back. Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair is the noes have it. Gentleman from Georgia.
Request a recorded vote, please.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia will be postponed. Clerk will read.
Page 101, line 22, Facilities Capital, $124,750,000. National Gallery of Art, salaries and expenses, $112,185,000. Repair, restoration, and renovation of buildings, $13,938,000. John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, operations and maintenance, $22,455,000. Capital repair and restoration, $13,650,000. Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, salaries and expenses, $10 million to remain available until September 30th, 2013. National Foundation on the Arts and the Humanities, National Endowment for the Arts, Grants and Administration, $135 million.
Clerk will suspend. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Wahlberg of Michigan, page 105, line 7, insert reduced by $10,600,000 after the dollar amount. Page 158, line 25, insert increase by $10,600,000 after the dollar amount.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight I'm offering an amendment that would reduce funding for the National Endowment for the Arts to fiscal year 2006 levels. In February, during the consideration of H.R. 1, I offered a similar amendment to cut NEA funding, which the House adopted. The underlying bill funds the National Endowment for the Arts at $135 million, which is $19.7 million reduction from last year's levels. I commend Chairman and the committee for recognizing that this funding has precipitated at an unsustainable rate. Since 2008, the NEA has received increases of over $10 million each year, including $50 million in funding from stimulus in 2009. These spending increases have coincided with annual trillion-dollar deficits. My amendment would take funding levels back to fiscal year 2006 levels at $124.4 million. If accepted, this cut returns $10.6 million to the spending reduction account. Now, I want you to know I believe in the fine arts, and of course, I know that that's defined by individual standards. In the past, I was privileged to serve on a symphony board for a time as the chairman of the Finance Committee. My early years, I was brought to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra by my parents, school trips and otherwise, and appreciate the impact that the fine arts can have. Tramping through art museums is not foreign to me as well, and enjoying much of which I see. But a time when our government must cut federal spending, when a time when our taxpayers cut and fix and repair and alter their own lifestyles and their spending, the primary source of funding for the arts should be through philanthropy, not forcing open the taxpayer's wallet without their choice. The National Foundation for the Arts does provide benefits to our country and helps fund our true fine arts. However, we're asking them to only fund their true priorities, and they can make those priorities. We know that the public has questions about some of the programs that the NEA has supported. I'm tempted to, but I will refrain from giving explicit illustrations of funded programs, projects that they have undertaken with much taxpayer disapproval. But suffice it to say that in recent years the NEA has funded exhibits that disparage religion, promote pornography, and support presidential campaigns. That is not supported by the general taxpayer and should not be. My amendment asks the NEA to only fund their true priorities. Now, if they want to determine those priorities, so be it. But if they want to determine priorities for youth concert series or young composers or you name it, that will be a choice as well, and I think most taxpayers would support those choices. Our country is a financial hardship. The sponsors of the arts should be sponsors of the arts, as I am. But taxpayers ought to know that we will expect them, like the rest of the programs and certainly the rest of society, to be efficient at this time. Our country is in a financial hardship, and we're not taking programs like the NEA off the table. We're just asking them to establish priorities with reduced funding, yes, but an opportunity to efficiently convey to the taxpayers their understanding of what we're going through as well. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Well, I'll rise to claim the opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're a great country. Great countries understand the importance of the arts. They understand that it's important not only to communicate with one another, but to leave a lasting legacy for future generations. The arts have the ability to communicate the most fundamental aspirations of mankind. They have the ability to evoke compassion. They have the ability to invoke the kind of spiritedness that causes countries to show undaunted courage, to rise above the problems of the day in pursuit of far more noble national objectives. The value of the arts transcends anything that we can quantify in terms of dollars and cents. We should be extraordinarily proud of our National Endowment for the Arts. Denise Graves, who is one of the finest opera singers in the world, who can stir the emotions just by hearing her beautiful, extraordinary voice. She said that she grew up in Washington, where the Kennedy Center is, but it could have been the other end of the world if she had not been able to get into a program funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. There are any number of men and women, young, middle-aged, old, who have come into contact because of the outreach that the National Endowment for the Arts has provided. And there are any number of communities across the country who, by use of the arts, by setting up a theater, by pulling people together, by getting a small amount of money from the NEA, which is far more an endorsement than it is financial support, have been able to develop local economies. We've heard from a number of big-name performers now who said they got their entry, the development of their career through the NEA. Some gave back by developing a theater in communities that they thought had seen their best days behind them, and yet by uniting the community, it's clear now their best days are ahead of them, because young people want to stay in that community. They're excited about the arts that are provided. This program does so much with so little, and yet the gentleman wants to cut $10.6 million. That's 0.03% of non-defense domestic discretionary funding. We had $174 million in the fiscal year 2011 bill. It was cut down to $155 million ultimately for FY11. And now it's been cut another $20 million, down to $135 million. I know my good friend from Idaho, the chair of the committee, wishes and knows it should be more. But I think most of us, when we reflect, understand that if we continue to take money from programs that provide so much to really the heart and the soul of this nation, we will lose those instruments we have to reduce the harshness and the rancor that divides us. It's the powerful media of the arts that enable us to transcend our differences, to appreciate real beauty and the truth that comes through the fine arts and the grace that ennobles the human spirit. NEA is a catalyst. It helps us create and sustain arts. It doesn't really fund much. What it does is to spawn the arts. It generates investment in the arts. The fact the gentleman mentioned philanthropy. There's a great deal of money out in this country. We're still the wealthiest country in the world, no matter how much people would like us to think that we're poverty-stricken, that we're seeing some of our worst days. We're a great and powerful and wealthy nation. Philanthropy is the principal source of funding of the arts, but NEA shapes much of that funding. It's a magnet for businesses. There are almost 700,000 businesses that are involved in the creation and distribution of the arts.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
I ask unanimous consent for an additional minute.
Is there objection?
The importance of this issue.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman. I thank my colleagues. And I do think that it's important that we make this nominal investment in the cultural lives of our citizens and in our children's futures. I can't imagine how a nation as rich and prosperous as ours would not consider it a priority to provide funding for the National Endowment for the Arts. There's too much that divides us as a nation. This is something that should be uniting us. Democrat and Republican, liberal and conservative, everyone can appreciate the arts because it inspires us all, because it inspires us to look past the parochial, the small-mindedness, to see the big picture, to appreciate greatness. This amendment should be defeated, and in it we should send a message that we understand what's important to the lifeblood of our national community. I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. For purposes of the gentleman from Idaho, rise.
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the Wahlberg Amendment. First, let me associate myself with the words from my good friend from Virginia and his comments on this. The Wahlberg Amendment would return the NEA funding to the 2006 levels of $126 million. The National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA, is funded in this bill at $135 million, which is a $20 million reduction from the fiscal year 2011 enacted level, a $32.5 million reduction from the fiscal year 2010 enacted level, and a $10 million reduction from the fiscal year 2008 enacted level. I was asked earlier by a member, would you support just going back to the 2008 level? We could do that, but we'd have to add another $10 million into it, and we frankly just don't have it. This would take it back to the 2006 level, as I said. Overall, the committee has cut $2.1 billion in this bill from the fiscal year 2011 enacted level. This is on top of the $2.6 billion we cut from the bill earlier this year. I think this amendment is excessive, but I will tell you that for some people, voting against any funding for the arts is okay with them. I'm not suggesting that that's what the sponsor of this amendment is proposing. He's only proposing a reduction in this. But there are members who believe that federal government or state government, no government, should be involved in the arts at all. I disagree. When we ran into problems several years ago, before I was here, and maybe it was when Mr. Moran was here, I can't remember, but they ran into some controversies with the arts and the funding for individual artists that they've done. Since then, the Interior Appropriations Committee has done some working with the NEA some reforms so that we don't fund individual artists. We fund what the intent is, I think, of the National Endowment for the Arts, and that is to get the arts out to the rest of America. If you're sometimes in a large city and that type of thing, you have access to the arts, but when you're in Salmon, Idaho, you don't have access to the arts like they do in some of the other areas. So one of the things I've been focused on and working with Chairman Landsman is making sure that the arts get out to rural America so that they have an opportunity to see these art performances, whether they're the visual arts or the performing arts or other things. But we need to get them out to rural America. If you want to come to Boise, Idaho, you will have missed Boise, Idaho in the summer if you don't go to the Idaho Shakespeare Festival, partly funded by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. Yes, they raise private funds. They have sponsorships and other things, but part of their funding comes from the National Endowment for the Arts. Chairman Landsman and I were, he was out in Idaho last spring, I guess it was, and we toured around Idaho and looked at some of the arts programs, the local art agencies that received some funding from the NEA and the impact it had on their operations. We also went to Jerome High School, where the Idaho Shakespeare Festival, the actors that did their performances in Boise at the festival toured the schools and gave performances to students, and then they sat there afterwards and talked with the students about what it was to be in the performing arts, how you get into it, what the pluses and minuses of it were, and other things. They helped educate these students in these communities. Very important thing. One thing we've done in this bill, or a number of things we've done in this bill, there are a variety of very popular programs, popular on both sides of the aisle. The American Jazz Masters Program, the Heritage Fellowships, the Big Read Program, Shakespeare in American Communities, are all have their funding maintained, not at the previous levels, but at a level so that they can maintain these very popular programs. The chairman has introduced a new program that we're working with him on exactly how it would work and what it would be, called Our Town, which is how the arts can help transform local communities and stuff through a grant program. So we've been working with him, but I will tell you, the arts are important. And I think having a federal investment in the arts is an important thing to have. I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman.
I thank the chairman for yielding. I just want to make it clear, because as I've listened to the opposition to it, it appears you didn't catch my train of thought. I'm not saying that the arts or the NEA is wrong. I'm saying it's time to make priority decisions, and certain priority decisions as recently as November of 2010 fund programs, Fire in the Belly, I won't go into the full description of it, hide and seek, that could be considered pornography and was in fact exhibit that was portrayed as that. Those are things that are priority decisions. I'm saying it is time, if we're funding those, we ought to give the taxpayer a break and say, if you want to attend those or support those, do it through philanthropy, do it through initial sponsorship themselves, but not the taxpayer.
Reclaiming my time, I appreciate the gentleman's concern. Hide and seek program the gentleman mentioned was not an NEA program, not funded by the NEA, and that was not part of the NEA. So, you know, we have a tendency to think that anything that's done in this country or this state or this community that is done in the name of arts is done by the NEA. That's not the truth. So when we attack them because of hide and seek, that's just not an accurate statement. Again, there have been times in the past when there have been criticisms of the NEA mainly because of the individual artists funding that went on. The committee has addressed that, and they have made reforms working with the NEA to make sure that those types of things are not funded in this bill, that we don't fund individual artists, that the main funding of the program is to get the arts out into the rural communities. And I said the American Jazz Masters program, the Big Read program, all vitally important programs that I think the American people like, and I think members on both sides of the aisle like. I yield back the balance of my time. Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Idaho.
I move the committee rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Chairman.
Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 2584, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2584 and has come to no resolution thereon. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 375, resolution providing for consideration of the bill, Senate 627, to establish the Commission on Freedom of Information Act processing delays and for other purposes.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. Pursuant to House Resolution 363 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2584. Will the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson, kindly resume the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of the bill, H.R. 2584, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill making appropriations for the Department of the Interior, Environment, and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2012, and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, an amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, is pending, and the bill had been read through page 105, line 13. For what purpose the gentlewoman from New York rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. The National Endowment for the Arts has a 40-year history of investing in communities across the country to expand access to the arts. The NEA has awarded 2,400 grants spanning communities in all 435 congressional districts. The proposed cuts to the NEA would have a crippling effect on a program that is proven to work. Often when I talk about the arts and how I feel about it, I always say how thankful I am to be able to work in an art building that is a masterpiece. But I'm going to be practical tonight. All we're interested in is money, and that's what I want to talk about. I hope that people will pay attention to what we get for that little bit of money. In FY 2010, the federal government invested $167.5 million in the NEA for the purpose of providing funding to nonprofit arts organizations. That funding created $166.2 billion in total economic activity, supported 5.7 million jobs, and listen to this one, and generated to the U.S. Treasury $12.6 billion in tax revenue. That does not include the state tax revenue or the local tax revenue. So we spent $167 million and got back $12.6 billion. I defy anybody in here to tell us that we get that kind of return on any money we spend here. I wish we could find more ways to multiply our money by such a magnitude while enhancing the public good at the same time. Investment opportunities like these are few and far between, and we should be expanding our investment in such a successful program, not cutting the funding to the bone. I'm the proud co-chair of the Congressional Arts Caucus, a group that has supported the NEA for almost 30 years. The Arts Caucus is composed of 186 dedicated bipartisan members who are committed to the growth and the success for the arts. And why? Because the arts make a difference. The NEA reached its peak level of funding in fiscal year 1992, but has never fully recovered from a 40% cut in fiscal year 1969, when once again people mischaracterized the work of the NEA. We've seen progress with increasing NEA funding since fiscal year 2008, but just last year the NEA was forced to deal with a crippling cut again to its annual budget. If this year's appropriations bill takes effect, the NEA will have had its budget cut by 20% in just the last few months. These cuts are not sustainable and do great harm to the success of the arts sector across the country. There's widespread national support for the NEA and the arts, including companies like Westinghouse and Bravo. And actually, what really happened so much for us, it was so good, was when Westinghouse and Bravo, Westinghouse particularly, said they would rather hire people who had a background in art because of what they were able to do, their innovation, using both sides of the brain. Bravo was wonderful, advertising all the time, important arts are to the children in this country. The bipartisan U.S. Conference of Mayors made art a priority in their 10-point plan, saying federal resources must also be invested in nonprofit arts organizations through their local art agencies with full funding of the federal arts and cultural agencies. In addition, I have a letter from 26 national art organizations urging Congress to prevent any further reduction to the investment in our nation's arts and culture infrastructure, and I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record.
The request will be recovered under general leave.
The simple truth is that funding the arts creates jobs. There are 756,007 arts-related businesses in the United States that employ 3 million people. In my district, there are 1,229 arts-related businesses and employ 15,864 people. And remember what has already been said so well by Mr. Simpson, is that this is seed money from the National Endowment for the Arts, which brings in other money, public money, private money, which is terribly important to make these programs survive. And these programs, as I've already pointed out, are an economic gold mine. They employ a creative workforce, they spend money locally, they generate government revenue, and are a cornerstone of tourism and economic development. Along with creating and supporting jobs, the arts provide job skills to our nation's youth. This is very important to understand, that are marketable to the innovative companies that drive our economy and push America to the forefront in the global marketplace. I've already mentioned Westinghouse, but there are many more. Exposure to the arts fosters learning, discovery, and achievement in our country. Research has proven, this is, again, simply a fact. Research has proven participation in arts education programs stimulates the creative, holistic, subjective, and intuitive portions of the human brain. For example, we know for a fact that...
The gentlewoman has expired.
5 minutes? May I ask for unanimous consent for 2 more minutes?
Is there objection? Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank you very much. For example, doctors, the one we've been told by the University of Davis, California Davis, that the only doctors who really understand what they hear in a stethoscope are those who have studied music. High school music students score 102 points higher on their SATs than their peers. Students with 4 years of art in high school attain 57 points more on their SAT. So we're making an investment in our students and our future. But they play other important roles elsewhere in the economy. They're attracted to business, comes to communities with heavy arts. We see that everywhere there is art in existence. The presence of the arts can revitalize rural areas, inner cities, areas struggling with poverty. That cultural tourism brings in $192 billion every year, $192 billion to the U.S. economy. Listen to those figures. I hope to goodness everybody's as impressed as I am. Furthermore, American arts are an important export for the country, bringing in $30 billion more every year. One statistic that I find particularly telling is that in 2010, the attendance at 3 New York museums, the Met, MoMA, and the Guggenheim, exceeded the attendance of all the New York professional sports teams, all of them combined, by over 300,000 visits. People are interested in the arts due in part to the NEA, and they come again and again and bring their families. Well, along with all this, there's a great intrinsic value that we know. I really must say that a lot of people think that art is not important, and they don't think about it or what it does to the human spirit. Art, in so many ways, tells us who we were, who we are, and who we hope to be. And if you think you're not affected by it, tell me what happens to you when you hear taps. Amazing Grace, America the Beautiful. And the stirring that it gives in your whole person makes you want to be better than you are. Please, please don't decimate this program in which we invest so little but get back so very much. I yield back to balance.
Gentlewoman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island rise?
Mr. Speaker, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, as a Congress, we have to, of course, responsibly cut spending. But at the same time, we also have to make the necessary investments that create jobs now, guarantee the future strength of our economy, and renew the vitality of our communities. And that's why we should absolutely reject this effort to further reduce the investment, our nation's investment, in the National Endowment for the Arts. Our targeted federal investment in the arts through the NEA is very modest and is really crucial to spurring the contributions of corporate and foundation partners through their support through philanthropy, sponsorships, and volunteerism that help to sustain and leverage arts investments in communities all across this country. This investment in the arts becomes all the more important during a time when states and cities all across this country face greater and greater fiscal constraints, and at the same time are searching for opportunities to leverage federal dollars and to spur economic development and job creation. I represent a state that has realized an extraordinary return on investments generated by the arts. In Rhode Island, the presence of the arts are really sewn into the fabric of our communities and of our economy. According to recent data from Americans for the Arts, in just the 1st Congressional District, in my district alone, more than 1,400 arts-related businesses employ nearly 6,000 people, and that represents more than 5% of the businesses in my district. As the former mayor of Providence, I've seen firsthand the economic impact of the arts and the power of art to transform people and places. I know the benefits of the arts in enriching our communities and uniting them as well. Arts nourish our soul. The United States Conference of Mayors sent a letter to the members of Congress urging us to protect funding in the arts and to reject this amendment, recognizing that arts create jobs and produce tax revenues, that arts put people to work, and that arts attract tourism revenue. Arts and the creative industries are an enormous part of what fuels our local economies, bringing hundreds of thousands of visitors to our cities, generating activity in restaurants, hotels, transportation, and hospitality services. This activity not only strengthens the vitality of our communities, it generates revenues for state and local governments. Across our country, the arts industry provides much more than aesthetic benefits. It creates meaningful economic benefits and opportunities. During this period of budget austerity, we shouldn't neglect those investments with a proven, positive rate of return. We shouldn't siphon off the fuel that helps power the American arts industry, a sector of our economy comprising more than 750,000 businesses, employing nearly 3 million people nationwide, and generating more than $166 billion in economic activity. Cutting the National Endowment for the Arts undermines our responsibility to create jobs and grow our economy and diminishes us as a nation. As one study demonstrates, when we consider the overall direct federal cultural spending of $1.4 billion, we're achieving a return on investment that's nearly 9 to 1. If we're really serious about strengthening our economy, putting more Americans back to work, and reining in our deficit, then we have to be smart about our investments and about our reductions. With estimates indicating that every dollar of federal funds invested in the arts generates $9 in economic benefits, further reductions to the National Endowment for the Arts are counterproductive and, in fact, will move our nation backwards. It moves us backwards not only in the fact that we lose the immediate economic return on the investment, but this cut also pushes our country further behind our competitors in the global economy. It was one of the great giants of the United States Senate, the great and passionate leadership of Rhode Island Senator Claiborne Pell, that led to the creation of the National Endowment for the Arts in 1965, the program that we're fighting to defend today. In 1963, Senator Pell opened hearings on preliminary legislation on this issue by stating, and I quote, "I believe that this cause and its implementation has a worldwide application. For as our cultural life is enhanced and strengthened, so does it project itself into the world beyond our shores. Let us apply renewed energies to the very concept we seek to advance, a true renaissance, the reawakening, the quickening, and above all, the unstunted growth of our cultural vitality." In those words, Senator Pell said clearly that this disinvestment that we're discussing today for the National Endowment for the Arts, nearly 50 years later, is a stark and appalling contrast to the renaissance and reawakening embodied in the National Endowment for the Arts. For too long, the arts have been the first target for spending cuts in our public schools and here at the federal level. It is at our own economic peril that we continue to deprive our youth and our communities of their connection to the arts. I've seen on so many occasions, if I might just ask for 1 minute to conclude. I have seen on so many occasions.
Is there objection? Objection is heard.
Are you speaking on this? Oh.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
I move to strike the last word, Mr.
Gentlewoman is recognized
Chairman.
for 5 minutes.
As sure as Wednesday follows Tuesday, you can count on congressional Republicans to propose gutting programs that benefit the arts and the humanities. It's as predictable as it is irresponsible and unwise.
It's the same old penny-wise, pound-foolish approach we've come to expect from a party that wants to spend lavishly on corporate giveaways while cutting just about every initiative that empowers the American people and improves lives in our communities. I can't believe that while the nation stands on the brink of default, while Republican stubbornness puts us less than a week away from economic calamity, we're having a debate about funding for the arts that represents 3 cents for every $100 of non-military discretionary spending. 3 cents, Mr. Chairman. Believe me, the budget for the National Endowment for the Arts isn't breaking the bank. Grants to support museums and theater companies are not what caused a huge deficit, and cutting them will not put us on a fiscally responsible course. In fact, investment in the arts more than pay for themselves. For every dollar spent on arts programs, the country gets back $9 in economic benefit. My friends on the other side of the aisle love to make arts funding a scapegoat. They never miss an opportunity to turn the spending debate into a culture war referendum on art. But let's be clear. The arts represent a vital economic industry, a mainstream employer of millions of Americans, and an integral part of a functioning society. The nonprofit arts sector generates more than $12 billion in tax revenues and more than $166 billion in economic activity every single year. Communities that have a vibrant artistic life are magnets for tourism, and they're creators of new businesses that we know create jobs. There's also evidence that communities that embrace the arts tend to have higher real estate values, more civic activities and volunteerism, less crime, and lower poverty rates. The arts are also a critical ingredient in the development of our children. Research shows us that students receiving arts education perform better academically and are more likely to succeed in life. But despite all the ways that arts support the common good, Republican leaders want to cut NEA. Instead, Mr. Chairman, I think it's time we cut big oil subsidies and cut loopholes for corporate jet owners. Arts programs have already taken a budget hit in recent years and are trying to do more with less. If we can give billions in subsidies to oil companies that are already raking in record profits, then surely we can maintain modest investments in the nonprofit art sector that makes a vital contribution to American life. Let's stop blaming small agencies for a fiscal crisis that was caused by 3 wars and tax cuts for the people who need them the least. Let's maintain robust funding for NEA. With that, I'll yield back the remainder of my time to the gentleman from Rhode Island.
I thank the gentlelady. For too long, the arts have been the first target for spending cuts in our public schools and here at the federal level. It is at our own economic peril that we continue to deprive our youth